Hi, artists of the world. I'm Natalia from Yes Art Marketing, and on this channel, I share practical ways to grow your art sales and build a sustainable creative business. So feel free to subscribe if you would like more of that. I want to talk about something today that is surprisingly simple, surprisingly effective, and yet something that most artists actually never do. And I think the reason most artists don't do it is because, well, we tend to wait for opportunities instead of creating them. Yeah, we were waiting to get discovered, waiting for somebody to invite us into a gallery, waiting for a collector to magically find our Instagram, waiting for the algorithm to finally decide that it's our turn. Yeah. And while all of those things can happen, they all depend on luck, yeah, and somebody else making a decision and taking charge of your fate and actually reaching out to people, risking rejection. It's a lot scarier, yeah, and that also factors in. There are probably dozens of businesses within maybe just a few kilometers or miles of your home that already have your potential buyers walking through their doors every single day. There are places where people are just sitting, having coffee, meeting friends, working remotely, browsing, I don't know, shopping, attending yoga classes, drinking wine after work. And in many cases, there are things hanging on those walls that people could look at and potentially even purchase. And that could also be your art. And yet, most artists never approach these places because they assume one of two things. Either they assume the business won't be interested, they would get rejected, or maybe they assume that somebody had to invite them first, or they assume that there's no way to sell work this way. Yeah, because if it's just hanging there, how would people understand that it's for sale and how to handle the transactions and all that? But all of these things can be organized and thought through. All of that is possible. The reality is that a lot of small businesses are actually very open to displaying local artwork because it makes their space more interesting, creates conversation, supports the local community, and often it also improves the overall atmosphere. In other words, it can genuinely be a win-win situation. You get visibility for your work and access to people who may have never found you online, and they get beautiful artwork that makes their space feels special and more unique and memorable. And all it really takes is being willing to start a conversation, reaching out, putting yourself out there, and yes, risking rejection, risking also being left unread, being ignored. But this shouldn't be the reason to not try. Now, before we get into the practical side of this, I want to say something important. The goal here isn't to walk into every cafe in town and try to sell them something. The goal is to find places that genuinely make sense for your work and for the kind of people who are likely to buy it. So this should be the place where your target audience actually goes to, because not every business is the right fit. Let's say if you paint contemporary abstracts that would look perfectly in a stylish wine bar or a boutique hotel, yeah, it probably makes more sense to approach these spaces than a sports bar with televisions covering every wall, right? Likewise, if your work has a calm, mindful feel to it, maybe yoga studios, wellness spaces, independent bookshops, cafes might be much better matches than, let's say, hotels. Yeah. So the first thing I encourage you to do is to spend an hour thinking about where your collectors actually already spend their time. Not where artists spend time, not where you would rather go, but where your collectors spend time, because those are often two very different things. Yeah. Somebody who would buy your work, where do they actually go on Saturday morning? What kind of places do they enjoy? What businesses fit naturally with your style and aesthetic? Once you start thinking this way, you'll usually find that a surprising number of opportunities are right there. I would actually start with making a list from like 10 to 15 places, nothing crazy, just enough to give yourself a few options. Yeah. And if possible, actually visit some of them. If they are in your town, you can make a day and make a tour. Yeah. Buy a coffee, have a look around, get a feel of the atmosphere, notice the walls, notice the people, take some pictures, notice whether your work would genuinely belong there. And this also helpful because when you eventually reach out, you'll be speaking from experience rather than sending a generic message to a stranger. You've been to the place, you know what it feels like. Yeah. And trust me, business owners can actually tell the difference immediately. Imagine you actually write to them and say, I love what you created with the space, I don't know, near the back window. Yeah. They would know that you've actually been there. And if someone writes, I don't know, dear sir or madam, or to whom it may concern, that's very generic. Yeah, it's clearly copied from the same email 50 times, and that's a very different feeling. So once you've identified a few places, the next step is simply reaching out. And I know that for some people, this is the scary part. Okay, this is where a little voice appears and starts saying things like, what if they say no? What if this doesn't make any sense? Yeah, but honestly, this is one of those situations where we tend to make the rejection much bigger in our heads than it actually is. Yeah, you're not asking them for money, actually. You're not asking asking them to buy your work. You're not selling them your work. You're proposing a collaboration that would benefit both of you. That's a very different thing. A good message is actually short, friendly, specific. You don't need to tell your entire life story, okay? You don't need to explain your artistic philosophy, write a artist statement, yeah, in 6 paragraphs. You simply need to show them that you understand their space, that you've thought about how your work might fit into it. Something like, hello, hi Sarah, I've been visiting your cafe for a while and I've always loved the atmosphere you've created, especially the I don't know, bright seating area, yeah, in the back where people tend to sit and work. I'm a local artist based here in the city, and I wondered whether you might be open to displaying a small selection of my work in your space. I create colorful contemporary landscapes, and I think they could complement the feeling that you've built for your customers. I will provide everything framed and ready to hang, and I'll make the process as easy as possible for your team. I've attached a few examples below, and I would love to hear whether this might be something you'd be interested in exploring. That's really all you need. Professional, friendly, personal, no pressure. Also, sooner or later, if someone is interested, the question of sales is going to come up. And you might get nervous there, but you shouldn't, yeah? Because even if you don't know right now how these arrangements usually work, the good news is that there actually isn't one correct way to do it. One option, which is actually quite common, is that the business simply allows you to display the work and takes no commission whatsoever if something sells. They are happy to have beautiful artwork on the walls, and you're responsible for handling any sales inquiries. Another common arrangement is a commission on sales, and in my experience, somewhere between 10 and 30% is actually reasonable for a cafe, yoga studio, co-working space, or boutique shop. If they want 50%, I would start asking what they're exactly doing in exchange for that percentage, because that's a gallery level commission territory. Okay, if they're simply providing wall space, then a lower percentage is actually much more appropriate. So don't be afraid to discuss this openly. These arrangements are negotiable. You can also offer alternatives such as fixed referral fee whenever a sale happens, which some business owners actually prefer because it's simple and it's predictable. Whatever you decide, just make sure it's clear from the beginning so nobody ends up feeling awkward later. And speaking of making things easy, let's talk about how people actually can buy the work. One of the biggest mistakes artists do is assume that interested people will somehow figure it out, and normally they don't. People are not that proactive. They don't do that, okay? So if someone falls in love with a painting while drinking their cappuccino, you want the next step to be ridiculously simple and obvious. I would recommend, first of all, having a small label next to each piece with the title, dimensions, price, and your contact details. And I would absolutely include a QR code. If, for example, you don't want to put too much text on the small label, you don't want to put the price out there, you can include the QR code that would lead to a place, to a page where they can check out, okay? QR codes are wonderful because they remove friction completely. Someone can just scan the code and instantly land on your website or your online shop, a product page for that specific artwork, a contact form, even your Instagram profile, okay? And as for payments, there are lots of options. Bank transfers work perfectly well. Many artists sell directly through their website. You can use payment platforms like Stripe or PayPal. To me, the easiest way seems that when people scan your QR code, they end up on a checkout page, so they can just insert their card details and pay directly. So there is less effort required from the buyer. The easier it is for them, the better. And finally, I want to encourage you to not judge this strategy based on one email or one conversation, because this is outreach. Outreach always involves some level of rejection. You might contact 10 places and hear back from 2. You might contact 15 and hear back from 3. Yeah, that's completely normal. What matters isn't whether every business says yes. What matters is that your work starts appearing in places where real people can encounter it. Because one of the things I've learned over the years is that opportunities tend to multiply once you start creating them. A cafe can lead to a collector can lead to a commission can lead to another introduction. It can be a chain reaction, but your being proactive creates these opportunities instead of you waiting for collaborations to come from the internet, the algorithm, or a gallery. Yeah, it came from one email you almost didn't send. So if you've been waiting for permission to put yourself out there a little more, this is it, okay? Make a list of 10 places this week, send a few thoughtful emails, and see what happens. You might be actually pleasantly surprised by how willing people are to support local artists when you actually give them the chance. So like this video if this was helpful. I wish you luck, and I will see you next Wednesday with the next video.